Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll Masechtas Horiot daf Ches. We are going to begin on Ches Amud Aleph by the Mishnah about 10 lines from the top. Says the Mastis. Ein based in Chayovin ad shiyayra b'davar shizdainu kares v'shkagaso chatas. And this is something which we already learned in the beginning of this Masechta. It's only when it comes to the psak of Beis Din, the only time a carbon of a par ha'elam davar shel tzibur will be required is if the actual punishment b'meza would have been kares, and the shogeg would therefore be chayiv a carbon chatos. That's the only time that we would apply the din of a par ha'elam davar shel tzibur. V'chein Mashiach. So too when it comes to, as we are learning in this new parak, when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, the dinim are the same, and therefore it's only under that circumstance. Says Rashi, carbon el davar shel chatas v'im hoyer b'davar shachayv an asham vadai baturin. Let's say instead of the chiv of a chatas would have been an asham, then the din would apply, because the chsiv b'asham vadai v'im nefesh achas. It uses that language based in ein him b'chlal nefesh achas. They don't fall into the category of nefesh achas. So that's one explanation. So too by Kohen Mashiach, by the Kohen Gadol, says Rashi, ein mevi par el al helm davar shizdanu kares suchatos. Ramakum asham vadai chayev l'havi asham vadai. So in that situation, instead of a par, he has to bring a carbon asham, lafishu b'chol nefesh achas, because he falls under the category of nefesh achas. Hachi hishmul et tzibor, then maybe par b'makam asham. Of asham yavi, taki would bring an asham. Okay, fine. However, asham vadai hanasi Mashiach v'yachid chayevnu based in baturin. So that's a distinction that only the nasi or the Mashiach, the Kohen Mashiach would have to, but not the Beis Din. And then the Mishnah concludes, V'loi ba'avodas kachavim. Also, there's no chiyuv of having to bring a par v'sa'ir as shiyar el davar shizdanikaras v'shkagasai chatas. Okay, says the Gemara. So Minolan, how do we know this din of the Mishnah that it's dafka, that it's on a chiyuv kares b'mezid? The Sanya, Rabbi Yomi nemerkan aleha. On one hand, the pasuk says aleha. So the pasuk says v'noida hachata ser shechata oleha, v'nemel hoan oleha, and it also says later on in Sefer Vayikra v'isha elachaisa lo sikach, that you're not allowed to take your basically your wife's sister. L'sur legalos ervasa oleha. So over there, the isser, as we know, of marry, let's say being boil, having tashmish with your wife's sisters is a kares. So malhon davish is done a kares v'shkachas chatas. Avkan davish is done a kares v'shkachas chatas. So therefore, we learn out, just like taking your wife's sisters is a kares, so too over here is only an isser kares. So ashran tzibur. I now see the case of the din of a tzibur. Mashiach Minon. How do we know that the same din applies when it comes to a Kohen Mashiach that is davka davar shizdan kares? So the pasuk says, "Well, ashmas ha'am." We've had this pasuk numerous times that says, "Im Kohen HaMashiach yechata lo ashmas ha'am," that the Kohen Gadol is the one who sins to a guilt of the nation. So Mashiach Katzibor. The fact that it says that we're talking about an individual, like Kohen Gadol, and he's comparing to Ashmas Ha'am, so therefore we're connecting that to the Tzibor. Fine. Nasi. How do we know when it comes to a Nasi? So Yolav mitzvahs. Ksiv Gami Nasi. It says regarding the Nasi, Asher Nasi Echata, that he sins. The Yasach is called mitzvahs Hashem Elkav, and he does among one of these mitzvahs, which he's not supposed to do, and he ends up violating. Okay. So that is regarding the Nasi. It says mitzvahs. The Asach has been mitzvahs Hashem exhibit Sibor, and it says V'im kol adas Yisrael yishku v'nelam davar me'eni hakahal v'osu achas mikol mitzvos Hashem. So it also says this by the tzibur v'osu achas mikol mitzvos tomat tzibur davar shezakaris v'shkagas uchatas, which we already established. Afnasi davar shezakaris v'shkagas uchatas yachid. So Omer Kra, when it comes to yachid, says Rashi nami enu maybe chatas. You only bring a chatas. This is not doing. This had nothing to do with the beis din. In general, when do you bring a chatas? It's only if b'mezid it was a chiv kares, denan kol mitzvah sibatayr, etc. How do we see that? Amar Kra v'im nefesh v'yilmul tachta me'elyon. So it says in the pasuk, v'im nefesh achas techata b'shkog. If you sin b'shaygeg, and fine. So says Rashi. So we learn out tachta me'elyon, above it regarding the nasi. So we learn out the yachid from the nasi, just like the nasi we said is dafka of its b'mezid kares. So too by the yachid. Okay. So then we said it's the same thing, but when it comes to Avodah Zarah, the chiv is dafka if b'mezid was kares. So how do we know that? Because Avodah Zarah is different, that it's learned by itself. It says Rashi, Dahacha ksiv v'chisishku v'lo sasu v'lo ksiv hacha kares. So it doesn't say over here kares. The fact that it doesn't mention by Avodah Zarah the word of kares, so maybe even if even if it's not something chayiv kares, you're still going to be chayiv. What would that be an example of? So Rashi says, Kegoin megadef, menashik, and merabitz, like we learned in Masechta Sanhedrin, that it's considered to be a loisaseh, someone like who hugs an Avodah Zarah, kisses it. And that's not a chiv kares, because you're not really worshiping it, like bowing to it. So in that situation, maybe you still would have to bring a carbon chatas if you violated that b'shogeg. Nemer kan me'ene b'nemer l'holon me'ene. Ma l'holon davar shezon akaris v'shkogos uchatas. Av kan by Avodah Zarah davar shezon akaris v'shkogos uchatas. Okay. Ashkelon Tzibur. Again, we understand that when it comes to the Tzibur that violates Avodah Zarah, then that's the chiyuv only if it's something al davar, something was on kares. Yachid nasi mishiach minol so makra. V'im nefesh achas echad yachid v'echad nasi v'echad mishiach. It doesn't make any difference. Kulam b'chlal nefesh achas hein. They all fall into the category of nefesh achas. V'yom tachtem in elyon hanichol man diyamer demapikla alya l'gzer shava l'oleho l'gzer shava. I can understand the one who wants out this word for Gzer Shava Kedamrin, like we said before. Or Banan Damapli Loleha Lorayas V'Tzror. However, as the Gemara in the beginning of Masechta Shavamos tells us, when the pasuk says Isha Chayisa Oleha Matam Wilmer Shnemer Yavami Yavaleha. So it comes to tell you to matir the Yavama and the Tzror, which is talking about a situation, as the beginning of Masechta Shavamos talks about, is that in the event that the man dies, so typically if the man dies and they're childless, then it's a chiyav yibum. Now what if this woman is an ereva to the brother, so that obviously the brother is not going to marry? Not only will she be mutter to the shuk, and that yibum's not done, so too her co-wife as well. To matter the tzror as well. So then, if you use that pasuk to teach that, so how do you know this din? That when the din is that it's dafgo and avodah zarah is on kares. So nafgo hu midetani le Rabbi Shua ben Levi lebrei. What did he tell his kid? So the pasuk says in Bamidbar, a lengthy pasuk. It says Ezrach b'bnei Yisrael v'leger hagar b'soichem. When it comes to whether the person who is the resident or the convert, Tar achas yilachem l'ois b'shkoga. The law is the same. So then it says, "V'hanefesh asher taseh biyad Rama." So this pasuk is connected to this pasuk. Then says, "Hu megadef." He was a blasphemer. And it mentions in that pasuk kares. So because of that pasuk is befer, says kares. So who should call it terkul avodas kachavim? We make a hekesh. Ma avodas kachavim shechavnos the kares v'ashkaros uchatos. Avkan shechayavnos the kares v'ashkaros uchatos. So when it comes to the din of avodas kachavim, so it's coming to tell you any time it applies to all other times, because we compare everything to avodah zara, and therefore that is the din, and therefore it's dafka by kares. So ashton yachid, so nasi mashiach bein bavodas kachavim bein b'shar mitzvahs tzibur manon. How do we know? Again, we only know this pasuk is teaching about an individual. How do we know the same din applies to a tzibur? So, namely, say by par helam davar shel tzibur, there's a chiyuv of par v'sayir. So yolf elyon metachtoin. So again, we learn out this link elyon metachtoin. So therefore, since it says it by a yachid, so too we're going to learn it also when it comes to the tzibur. V'Rebbe, how do Rabbi Shimon Levi ma'yavidalei? So how does he? What does he do? In other words, how does he learn this din of Rabbi Shimon Levi of this hekesh? So since the Torah does make a distinction between individuals and a rabbim, how is that? Rabbim b'sayif. When it comes to avodah zara, irnei dachas, the din is if it's the majority, so they get killed by the sword. However, moinim avad, their money is lost. Yechidim, when it comes to an individual, beskila, they get a stronger death penalty that worship avodah zara, but umoinim polat, but their money is spared. So because there's different dinim between the yach and the rabbim, regarding again the dinim of avodah zara and irnei dachas, yachol nachlik b'karbanosayim. You would also think that we should split their karbanos, says Rashi. But meized ancher irnei dachas yachol nechal b'sheg b'karbanosayim. The chihei chedachol tzibur miyachidim. The carbon tzibur b'avos kachavim lo dal milushim carbon yachid hachanami nechal b'karbanosayim to havi cholok demarubin she'asu shaygin the irnei dachas. If you have, let's say, a bunch of people that sin with idol worship, doi havi damu oilam l'shum carbon lo tzibur l'chidi. Talmud Tarachasil V'Gaimer. That's coming to tell you the chiddush is that it's the same carbon when it comes to avodah zarah. So Maskav Rav Chilkia Mehagroinia Taima Dolachal Kakasim, because there's no distinction. Hachalk, if there would be a difference, Havim and Nachlik. You maybe think there would be different carbonis in the case of an irnei dachas. So my nasi, what carbon would you bring? Nasi part sibor. So let's say you would bring a part sibor b'shar mitzvahs hu demaisi nasi par elam v'ser lachatas. So tzibor v'adas chachavim hu demaisi nasi seir. So maybe you should bring a he goat. Nasi b'shar mitzvahs hu demaisi. So in other words, if you want to tell me it's got to be a different carbon, so again, if let's say you would bring a part sibor, so b'shar mitzvahs hu demaisu. Right, we see that a par is brought with regard to other mitzvahs that the tzibur has to bring a par. If you bring a par, well, oyula sir lachatos, so there's a par nesayir, which is unique that you have to bring both. But again, tzibur b'avodas kachavim hu demesu. We already know that that's what the tzibur has to bring. So nasi sayir, so maybe he only has to bring a sayir, but we know that a nasi b'shar mitzvahs hu demesi, a nasi brings a he goat. Nasi seir, a female one, yachinami, they also bring. So hainu karbonai, that's the same carbon. So alam below. So it's a tzibur mesi parlo oila. Maybe the tzibur brings a par and a sol chatas. Bahani by the irnei dachas imcha. Maybe it should be. It's a par nesayir. Maybe it's flipped. Par is a chatas yol oila. Inami sarich v'notakana kamash mulan. Maybe sarich v'notakana, says Rashi. Le'ir nidachas b'shaygeg di eshel achale kamashmon tar achas demesi kol chad se'ira ki yachid. So they can still bring a se'ira just like a yachid. So you wouldn't think, well, maybe by an ir nidachas, this is like you have no options. Kamashmon that can still be done. Okay. Now the kuliyal mamiya kiksivi hanikroi. So my mashma, we're saying that this psukim that we're quoting is about idol worship, but it doesn't say anything about idol worship. So how do you know that's what it's talking about? So Rabbi, the Itema, possibly Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the Yermol some say it was Kedi without names. Because the pasuk says, in the same vicinity, in the same Bamidbar Tesvav, it says V'chi Sishku, they violated b'shoygeg v'lo saso es kol mitzvahs ha'elu. They didn't do any of these mitzvahs. So ezehi mitzvah shishakul kachol mitzvahs. It says you didn't do kachol mitzvahs kula. So what mitzvah is shokol kol tar kula? Haviyam is over kachavim. So therefore, this is like an illusion that is referring to avodah zarah. Debei Rebbe Tana. I'm recording the pasuk because the pasuk says also again in Bamidbar Tesvav. Asher Dibur Hashem El Moshe. It says that one of these mitzvahs in which Hashem spoke to Moshe. The Ksiv, and then furthermore it says, again just the next pasuk, Eis Koil Asher Siva Hashem El Aleichem, or anything which Hashem commanded, Biad Moshe, in the hands of Moshe, Min HaYoim, from this day, L'Dorasechem, for future generations. So, the Ezuhi Mitzvah Shehi B'Dibur Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu. What is a mitzvah in which was said in the Dibur of Hashem, V'tzivo alidei Moshe, and it was commanded alidei Moshe, Haviyam Rizov Kachavim. What does that mean? Because if you look at Rashi, the Anoichi V'lo Yelocha, when it comes to Dafka, those two, which is connected to Avodah Zarah, V'lo Yelocha, Hagavura Shim'anum, the Hainu Shishamu B'Dibur Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu. Those are the only times that we mamish heard from Hashem directly. The Siva Alidei Moshe become Parshas V'Torah. Could go Los Shtachav El Acher, Los Shemanu El Mapi Moshe. Those things we only heard from Moshe. So there's certain mitzvahs. So when it comes to Avodah Zarah, there was just the basic V'lo Yelocha, and then Moshe elaborated upon it. So therefore, it's talking another hint that's referring to Avodah Zarah. The Tana Rabbi Yishmael, Anoichi V'lo Yelocha Mepi Gvur Shimon, that we mamish heard it directly from Kodesh Baruch Hu, which is the reason why we say that Torah, Sivalon and Moshe, Torah is the gematria of 611, which is the Gemara in Makos. So because Anoichi V'lo Yelocha was directly from Hashem. Okay. Debei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, as we continue to Chesed Beis, L'min HaYoyim Asher Siva Hashem V'Halo Dorisechem. So Ezu Mitzvah Shehi Nemra B'Tchila. So what is this mitzvah which was said initially? Says Rashi, what does that mean? It means it was said at the beginning of the Aser Sedibris, the very first of the 10 Commandments. Because that's what it means when it says Hayoim So it's like it was mentioned first. There's Avodah Zarah. I have a ha'im remar Esther mitzvahs nesav Yisrael b'mara. We know that we were actually commanded 10 mitzvahs at Mar, which is even before Matan Torah. So therefore, we don't see that Avodas Kachavim was first, right? The first thing that was mentioned, because in the Seir Sedibur is the first thing we mentioned. It's not true. We were given mitzvahs at Mara, Kibbut Aveim, Shabbos. So therefore, Taka, we can't answer like that because there are mitzvahs that that predated Avodah Zarah. So you have to come up with the other answers that we said before. Okay, let's look at question 1. So ma also haikra lamed bedin carbon b'shaygeg. So again, this is referring to Avodah Zarah. So it's a hekesh called Torah Avodas Kachavim. The ein chayav chatas el dumi de akum is done kares. It's got to be a situation that's a punishment of kares. 2. L'chad man di oimer shelo chiluk b'Avodas Kachavim bin rabam yichidim kishem shechalukim b'oinshim b'mezid. even though when it comes to Nidachas, b'mezid, there is a punishment, and the difference between the Yoch and the Rabbim is different. However, when it comes to B'shaygeg, the din is the same, and they bring the same carbon. Okay, question TA4. Okay, TA4. Let's see. So we did this already. Oh, Inyan Ma'ashav and Nasi Umashiach. How's the Nasi and Mashiach the same? So again, this shows us, as we said before, that we bring a seira for avodas kachlava. Okay. TA5. Mehechi Alfina, the pasuk of Shishkavu Sisu as called mitzvah sa'ela, is talking about avodas zara. So, what mitzvah is shokol kechol mitzvahs? It's avodas zara. What is a mitzvah? She b'dibur shel kadosh baruch hu b'tziv alidei Moshe ze avodas zara. What did I write over here for question TB7? Maybe I wrote the same thing. Is a mitzvah shokol chol Torah kul haviyom ze avodas zara. Ze tishma mehashem atzma b'har Sinai. Okay, it's pretty close. I'll have to give myself full credit for that. Okay. All right, let's get to the next Mishnah. We're going to get down to the next Mishnah. All right. Says the Mastis. So let's go straight to Rashi. Rashi says that it throws in the word bastin. Bastin is not going to be chayav a carbon on an asay or a los asay pertaining to the mikdash. Says Rashi, behind the tumas mikdash or kadasha, which we learned at great length that in Masechta Shavuos, right, that there's a chayav carbon olav yayirid. If a person enters into the mikdash tamei or eats something tamei, it could be also if you didn't didn't know you went to the mikdash, right? So asay shiba mikdash v'yishluchim in a machane called sarua. So someone with saras can't enter, right? So you can't enter into the base of mikdash while you're tamei. It's an asay. A los asay is v'yitamu es machaneim. Shalva b'yishu davar shizdadu kares. Entering into the base of mikdash b'mezid is a chiv kares shgagasu chatos. Hoyel ve'en shgagasu chatos kavua. El carbon chatas olav yorid hilchach pater legamri. So, pretty interesting. Even though it's true, this is a case where b'mezid you enter, you know 100% your tummy, you enter the base of mikdash, it's mamash isakaris. B'shaygeg, there's a chiv carbon chatas, but in that case, it's an oil of yorid. It's not a carbon kavua. It's not a carbon like we said that you always have to bring the exact same type of carbon. In this situation, like a seira, a kisva, or a seira. Here, it's oil b'yorid. It's depending on one's financial status, is when it comes to tumas mikdash kedashav, and therefore the din doesn't work when it comes to that, even though it's b'mezid is chiv kares. Okay, ve'en mevi'in oshim toli al aseh ve'al lois aseh sheba mikdash. Similarly, if for whatever reason there was a suffix, so you do not of tummy. I'm not sure. Did I enter? I wasn't sure. Was I tummy? So in that case, there's no asham talei. You are chayiv when it comes to the dinim of nida. Says Rashi, based in al asay ve'alois asay shibenida. Dahav is the dainu karis gaksuchatas kavua. When it comes to, unlike Tumas Mikdash Kedaisha, when it comes to Tumas Nida, which is a Isser Kares B'mezid, so the carbon which you would have to bring B'shaygeg is a carbon Kavua. So when it comes to Nida, it's Chatas Kavua, it's not Oiv Yared, like Tumas Mikdash Kedaisha. So let's go back to the Mishnah. So Ezi mitzvah sasei shemanida. So what would be a positive mitzvah by nida? Pirish min nida, that you should separate yourself from nida. Says Rashi, Koimer b'samach levesta, during her vest, the time where it's possible, depending on whether she sees regularly, right, is a way to determine therefore, because there's a certain pattern of her seeing dam on a certain time, so therefore there's a chiyuv of vest that you have to separate for a certain period of time. Because we're concerned, even though she's not in nida now, but because this is a typical time, shas vest, so therefore because that when you're having tashmish, she may end up being a nida, and that becomes extremely problematic. If b'shas tashmish you see that she's a nida, what are you supposed to do? So the Gemara over there discusses, you have to wait until your Aver's mace, etc. D'chsiv v'hizartem as b'nei Yisrael. Can the Gemara Masechta Shavuos, as again it discusses over there. Okay. Anyway, so that is the Mishnah. Isn't we miss this? She's a nida, so parshman nida. Mitzvah loisa say al tavoy al nida, that a person should not have tashmish to be with a nida. Okay, says Gemara. So so how do we know what we just established in this Mishnah? Again, that when it comes to Tumas Mikdash Gadashav, there's no din par hel of davar shel tzibor. So minel midid tzibor will machavi carbon be alma of a yachid asham tali nami, so nami loy. So Amir Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Avdimi nemer v'asham b'chatis. It says, let's try to find these psukim over here. So it says asham regarding it says guilt regarding chatas. It says v'im nefesh achas techata b'shgaga. So it says if a person violates b'shaygeg, and it says v'ashem, right? So it uses the language of ashem by a chatas, which is that you did a sin b'shaygeg, you did a sin. Uva'ashem toloi, and also by an ashem toloi, which it says down here. Also in Vayikra Hey, Im Nefesh Ki Sechatav Yoso Achas Mikol Misas Hashem V'lo Yoda. It says you didn't know, you weren't sure. Did you sin v'ashem? So it also says that. That's why Ashem Toli is because V'lo Yoda. It says you don't know. V'nemer v'ashmoy b'tzibor. It also says that v'im kol adas Yisrael, which is b'tzibor, right? And it also says v'ashemoy. So it says v'ashem or v'ashemoy, but see, so ma v'ashem b'yachid b'chatas kavua. So when it comes to an individual who violates an isser kares b'mezi b'shagi, when he has to bring a carbon, he has to bring a carbon a chatas kavua. Afa shoma b'tzibor b'chatas kavua. So too, when it comes to the tzibor, the par elam davar shel tzibor, it has to be in a situation where it's only a chatas kavua. But not a olav yarid. Umat tzibor b'chatas kavua v'ashem toli nami ein bo ela al savik chatas kavua. And therefore, again, this other pasuk, which talks about the ashem toloi of lo yadav ashem, since it says ashem, it's only in a situation where it's a carbon chat, or there will be a chiyuv of a chatas kavua, excluding Tumas oil mikdash kedashim. Amri, so he said like this: Ihachi so carbon olav yarid nami. If you study the psukim, it says also in V'yikrahei that it says also the word v'yesham, and it's referring to the case of Tumas Mikdash Kedashim, or Stam, a case of Oil V'Yard. So done in Ashim in Ashmoi, and done in Ashim in Yashem. So when it comes to the din of oil v'yored, right? When it has the din of oil v'yored, we see that the pasuk changes to yesham. So therefore, we're not going to use that word. Yesham means will be guilty. So my nafkamin of hatanda de Rabbi Shmuel v'shava koyin v'ba'al koyin zu yeshiva zuibiyah. You can even have two totally different words. You could still learn that out. So, as we've usually answered this is, that's only if there's no other way of answering it, but if there's a more similar way of learning, that's what we do. But we're going to leave that off as a kasha for now. But furthermore, nail of min v'asham tumas mikdash gadashav. Dechsiv, that what can we learn from tumas mikdash gadashav? The dechsiv v'utame v'ashem. So over there, it does say the word ashem, right? And l'chayra, and it says, "O nefesh asher tiga b'chol davar tamei," a person who touches something tamei, or benivlas chaya tamei, you touch a nevela, which is impure, or nevelas behema tameya, or nevelas sheretz tamei, v'nel memenivu tamei v'ashem. So this is a case of tuma. Tuma's mikdash v'kedashav. Right, and there it says the word ashem. And Mamish says that word. So what do you mean? Oh, so why can't you therefore also compare Ol V'Yared, even though again it's not a Chatas Kavua, that maybe the din of bringing a par is also required. So my papa done v'ashem mitzvah Hashem min v'ashem mitzvah Hashem. So in the pasuk it doesn't say mitzvah Hashem. In the other cases they all say mitzvah Hashem. So it says mitzvah Hashem by the asham tolei. It says mitzvah Hashem by V'im Nefesh Achas, if we're talking about the Yachid. And it also says mitzvah Hashem, interestingly enough, when it comes to the Tzibur. Kol Adas Yisrael, it says mitzvah Hashem. The only time it does not say is by the Ol V'Yared. So therefore, since it's not exactly the same, so therefore we're not going to learn out from it. So I'm only Rav Dimi, Barashi, Rav Haba, V'nel V'ashim V'nesias Avoin min V'ashim V'nesias Avoin. So both of them mention Nesias Avoin. So why don't we learn out from that? Right, so again, there's similarities in the psukim also. So how does this answer? So look at Rashi. Hilchach Armina Matzibur Chatas Kavua Af Ashim Tolei Enu Ba El Al Savik. Okay, so Elam Rav Nachman Yitzchak Donin VaAshim Mitzvah Hashem Ashel Siyasena VaAshim Mitzvah Hashem Ashel Siyasena VaYachiach Shemias Koil Vito Yisavosayim VaTumas Mitzvah Kadashim Shel Nemer Behen VaAshim Mitzvah Hashem Asher Lo Siyasena. So it doesn't add the words Asher Lo Siyasena, right? So because the other ones say Asher, it says Mitzvah Hashem. They say Asher Siyasena, and it says Ashem. That's by the Asham Toloi. It says that, okay. And when it comes to the Yachid, it says Mitzvah Hashem. It says Asher Lo Siyasena v'Ashem, a Yachid. And by the Tzibor, it also says Mitzvah Hashem Asher Siyasena v'Ashemai. So there's more links and connections than by the Ol Yared, even though it's true, it does say, it says, okay, Yesham may be a problem, but it also says Ashem, but it doesn't have all these together, and therefore because of that we exclude it. Okay, we're going to stop there. Maybe we have another question, and maybe we don't. Adkan.